All right, good day to everybody. It is December 17th, and today we actually look at two books, two letters of Paul, Titus, the one to Titus, and then to Philemon. So we got some material we got to go through today. So let's start with Titus, just like Timothy, a young pastor, and Paul writes to him with some wisdom, some advice. Let me read from the Wesley Study Bible. Titus is the briefest of Paul's pastoral epistles and shares 1 Timothy's practical interest in forming faithful congregations. Titus enjoys a close and trusted association with Paul, who in 2 Corinthians calls him brother and a partner and co-worker. Paul also places Titus at the center of a conflict with traditional Jewish believers who argued that pagan converts like Titus should be circumcised as a sacred rite of initiation into Christian fellowship. This theological controversy carries over to this letter. The teachers who oppose Titus's ministry in Crete claim to know God, but are of the circumcision, and pay more attention to Jewish myths and commandments and quarrels about the law than to the gospel. In response, Paul's striking and repeated references to both God and Christ as our Savior anchor important summaries of sound doctrine and the letter's attention to civility, more so than to the church order. It cultivates the internal life of a faithful congregation that resists the disruptive effects of defective teaching. Okay, so Titus is a Gentile. He is a convert, and one of the complaints among Jewish Christians, and this is not Jews outside the church, Jews who don't believe in Jesus. These are Jewish Christians who think Titus needs to be circumcised in order to be in leadership. Now, Paul's already addressed this in Galatians and Colossians and elsewhere it's addressed, and that is that the Gentiles who come to Jesus do not need to take on circumcision in order to be part of the covenant, in order to serve and to be faithful. So Paul's very clear about that, and he's going to reinforce that to Titus. He is going to talk about the importance of sound doctrine, the importance of good teaching, because good teaching matters. Bad teaching matters too, unfortunately, in the wrong way. And so he wants to make sure that this is the case. He's very hard on those of the circumcision, that is those Jewish Christians who still want to hang on to circumcision for the Gentiles. Paul's very clear about that. It is interesting that Paul refers to both God and Jesus as the Savior. And so here we see what is called a higher Christology, or that is a higher view of Jesus, where Jesus is, yes, fully human, but he also is divine. And some people have said that this belief that Jesus is divine comes later, maybe the beginning of the 2nd century, that the early church didn't have this concept of a divine Jesus. That just is not borne out in documents, friends. Studies of the Gospels, of all the Gospels, and studies of the rest of the New Testament, it's very clear that there are lofty claims being made about Jesus very early on. And in fact, the earliest confession, and this is one thing scholarship has agreed on, the earliest confession is Jesus is Lord. The assumption is that means he's also divine, okay? You can't be Lord if you're not divine in the Jewish Christian world, all right? Okay, so you get that. You also get, Titus is being admonished to make sure good deeds are being maintained. Again, character matters for leadership. This is all throughout the Bible. We see this, though. We've seen this in 1st and 2nd Timothy and now Titus. The other thing I want to mention is verse 1 of chapter 3. Remind them, that is the folks, the people, to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good work, to speak evil of no one, etc., etc. One of the things that's interesting is when the Bible tells Christians in the New Testament to be subject to the authorities, the governing authorities, you and I have a little bit of a different picture from that, because we live in a representative democracy, and we don't view the government as hostile, sometimes maybe inconvenient to us and things like that. But for the most part, we have this positive view. When you read being subject to the authorities in the New Testament, the reason that they're being told to be subject to the authorities is not because there's some kind of profound obligation to be good citizens, but rather it's really because be subject to the authorities, live your life in a good way, be holy, be just, be kind, be faithful, be generous, do all those things that will ingratiate you to those in charge, so that they will just let us do our thing. In other words, when Paul talks about this to Timothy, he says in a sense, pray for all in authority, just so that they'll leave us alone, just so they'll let us do our thing. Let us be faithful, let us worship, let us proclaim the gospel. We just need for them to be out of our way. And this is sort of what you get here. So there's nothing like overly, there's nothing promoting here being a good citizen. Not that being a good citizen is a bad thing. And in fact, I believe that we Christians should be good citizens of whatever earthly nation we find ourselves in, and we should be obedient to the authorities as long as it doesn't compromise our Christian faith. But that's really not what's going on here. It's just be subject, ingratiate yourselves with everybody so that they won't see you as a threat, and will let you do your thing. Okay. All right. So let's end there with Titus. Philemon. All right. This is an interesting little letter. Let me read the introduction to the Wesley Study Bible. In the last letter of John Wesley's life, dated February 24th, 1791, addressed to Britain's paramount abolitionist, William Wilberforce, who had been, and by the way, I love that letter to Wilberforce. It's just a wonderful read. Okay, back to the subject. Addressed to the paramount abolitionist William Wilberforce, who had been converted under his ministry, Wesley referred to slavery as that execrable villainy, and he concluded his thoughts upon slavery with this prayer for slaves: Thou Savior of all, make them free, that they may be free indeed. In his notes, Wesley aptly discerned in Paul's letter to Philemon a message that infinitely transcends all the wisdom of the world, and it gives us a specimen how Christians ought to treat us of secular affairs with higher principles. Wesley was correct, for in this letter, Paul masterfully edges Philemon toward freeing his slave through a combination of intimacy and public coercion. Paul's appeal for the freeing of Onesimus with intimate family terms, twice addressing Philemon as brother and claiming to be Onesimus's father. Onesimus is no mere slave, but a father's son, and if Paul's letter is successful, Philemon will consider him an actual beloved brother in the flesh. By addressing his letter not only to Philemon, but also to the whole church, Paul sets his personal appeal in a communal context. This communicates that what Paul does with the slave is not entirely a personal matter, but a public concern for the church, a community of grace that inevitably shapes the values of its individuals. Powerful little letter. So what's going on here? All right. So first, again, let's talk a little bit about the household in first century Rome. Could be an extended family, but also maybe people who lived there who were either slaves, maybe people who worked for you. So the household could be diverse and multifaceted. You also had churches that formed in some of these houses, and they would worship together. And you would have masters and slaves and children and a whole bunch of people worshiping together. And try to picture that. Try to picture a master and a slave who worship the same, the God of Israel, who even though they're master and slave, call each other brother, okay? And who worship together. This is kind of scandalous in a stratified empire. What seems to have happened is Onesimus found Paul was a runaway, and that doesn't necessarily mean he was doing anything illegal, because depending on the kind of slave he was, and there was a variety of slavery in the ancient world, he could have freedom to come and go. He finds Paul to ask Paul to intercede on his behalf for his owner, Philemon. We don't know what Onesimus has done. We don't know what kind of trouble he's gotten into, but he's gotten into some trouble. And so Paul writes this letter, presumably sending Onesimus back with the letter to give to him. And Paul basically intercedes. And this is, by the way, this is this is Paul at his passive aggressive best, okay? He uses the language of family and Philemon as his brother, Philemon Onesimus as brothers, even though they're master and slave, Paul as Onesimus' father in the faith, and wants to basically, and he makes, as the introduction here states, makes this a public matter for the church, because it's not just addressed to Philemon as personal correspondence. It's to be read to the church there. And let's look at verse 13, where Paul says, I wanted to keep him with me so that he might be of service to me in your place during my imprisonment for the gospel, but I prefer to do nothing without your consent, in order that your good deed might be voluntary and not something forced. Okay. And by the way, he also says to Philemon, I'm also appealing to you as my child. And by the way, he says, if he owes you anything, put that on my account. Oh, by the way, don't think about the fact how much you actually owe me for being your father in the faith. So this is really wholly passive aggressiveness. And I'm not a fan of passive aggressive people. I got to tell you that I like to deal with people directly. There's one thing that just irritates me is people who are passive aggressive. But Paul here is being super passive aggressive for Onesimus' sake. So one has to think that by the time this letter has been read, that Philemon maybe has very little choice. Maybe he frees him, or maybe at the very least, if he doesn't free him, that the relationship between them is now different in the household. Again, this is the early church attempting to deal with these relationships that they're not going to change by Roman law, because that's not going to happen, and it doesn't even enter their mind. But they change the relationships within the household. So this is a wonderful, wonderful little letter about emancipation that's at the heart of the gospel and reconciliation, isn't it? And so this is just a wonderful letter. Let me read to you from the Wesley Study Bible, a Wesleyan core term, reconciliation. The letter to Philemon asks for the welcome of Onesimus, especially the forgiveness of any wrong done, inviting reconciliation between the parties. In sermon number 7, The Way to the Kingdom, John Wesley described reconciliation as atonement, at one-ment with God. This reconciliation is the result of the forgiveness of sins made possible by the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ for all. An individual's acceptance of this forgiveness results in reconciliation, or right relationship with God in Christ. According to Wesley, reconciliation with God brings an individual to unspeakable joy and hope for the fullness of the image of God to be revealed through the Holy Spirit's ongoing work of sanctification. This deepening of one's relationship with God enables believers to extend grace, forgiveness, and mercy to others. As persons grow into the image of Christ, all relationships can conform to this pattern of holy living. And that's what Paul's about here. By the way, there is a tradition, and we don't know if it's true or not, but there is a tradition that Onesimus was freed and eventually became a bishop in the church. Just don't know if we can confirm that or not, but it's not impossible either. Okay, friends, that's Titus and Philemon, and tomorrow we will begin 3 days in the book of Hebrews. Let's pray. Gracious God, thank you for the reconciliation that's at the heart of everything that you have done for us in Jesus Christ. And may we reflect today upon maybe those persons we know that we could use a little reconciliation with them. And if so, may you give us wisdom on how to join together to put aside past differences in order to reflect this gospel of one people. We lift our prayers in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, friends, take care.